Yeah.
Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. If I'm Purdue, I'm throwing the entire 2019 season out the window. Just forget about it. Because after getting the Boilermakers to back-to-back bowl games, Jeff Brohm's squad went just 4-8 in 2019. But that was largely due in part to the amount of injuries that they suffered. They lost their quarterback Elijah Sindelar after just 3 games. Their star wide receiver Rondake Moore going down on the exact same play. They lost their backup quarterback in Jack Plummer for the final 3 games of the season. And their leader on defense, Markus Bailey, they lost him back in September. They were losing pieces left and right, both offensively and defensively, yet still had 4 games decided by just 1 possession during that 4-8 season. I'm expecting Purdue to be much more competitive in 2020 and to have a great chance at returning to the postseason. They return 8 starters on offense, and the key to their offense is going to be who plays quarterback. More than likely, it will be Jack Plummer, who had over 1,600 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions before he went down with an injury. He did all those stats in 6 games. And if he is in fact quarterback, he will have great weapons surrounding him. That includes David Bell, who had 100 receiving yards or more in 6 of the final 9 games of the 2019 season. And they will get Rondake Moore back. If he can stay healthy, he will be one of the most electric and elusive wide receivers in the entire Big Ten Conference. The only thing that Purdue needs is not only health, but improvement on the run game, as they averaged just 83.3 yards per game in 2019, good enough for 126 in the entire nation. Defensively, they allowed 30.6 points per game last year, but they do return 7 starters and get a new defensive coordinator in Bob Diaco. Lorenzo Neal returns on the defensive line, and the linebacking core will be led by Derek Barnes, who led the team with 7.5 sacks last year. You will see a drastic improvement defensively from this Purdue team. They start off the season right in the middle of Big Ten Conference play, taking on Nebraska on the road. So, unfortunately, new defensive coordinator, relatively new quarterback, trying to get people back fully healthy. They don't get to open up with a cupcake opponent. And if you look at their schedule, there's not a single team on this schedule that you can mark down as an automatic win for Purdue. Not a single FCS school, not an easy group of 5 school. It's all very difficult for the Boilermakers. And they start off with Nebraska here, a team they defeated 31-27 at home last year. David Bell scored the game-winning touchdown with just a little over a minute left. But this is a Nebraska team that needs to start strong in year 3 under Scott Frost. Like Purdue, this is a Nebraska team that needs to stay healthy. And if their quarterback, Adrian Martinez, is back and fully healthy, I think that Nebraska will have just enough to exploit this at Purdue defense that will still be going through some changes to get a season-opening win. I think the Boilermakers take a loss in week 1. They then get intriguing games against Memphis and Air Force. 2 non-conference games, but 2 very difficult group of 5 opponents. Memphis out of the American Athletic, Air Force out of the Mountain West. And I'll be quick to tell you this. Purdue will lose one of these games. They could very well lose both, but they will lose one. And I think that one loss comes to Air Force, not Memphis. I think they take care of Memphis and brand new head coach Ryan Silverfield, but I do think they lose to Air Force, a team that returns 9 starters, but includes their star quarterback Donald Hammond. The Falcons went 11-2 last year. And the reason I say I think they'll lose to Air Force more than Memphis is even though Memphis is going to have such a great offense, Brady White, Kenneth Gainwell, DeMonte Coxey, I think Air Force's offense is going to be a little bit more difficult to stop. They averaged nearly 300 rushing yards per game in 2019. Purdue allowed 192.5 rushing yards per game in 2019. Air Force dominates the time of possession, which means every offensive possession that their opponent gets has to count, has to result in points, because usually Air Force is putting up points on their drives. So I think this is going to be a much more difficult game for Purdue defensively than maybe Memphis will be. And keep in mind, that in 2018 they had a loss to Eastern Michigan. In 2019 they had a loss to Nevada. Seeing Purdue lose to a Group of 5 opponent is not out of the ordinary. So I think they are able to sneak by Memphis, but I do think they lose to Air Force, who defeated Colorado and Washington State in 2019. And the Boilermakers are 1-2 going into their final non-conference game on the road against Boston College, a team that I do think they will defeat. And I know people are going to be up in arms about that. How can they lose to Air Force but go on the road and beat Boston College? I think Air Force is a great tune-up for Boston College. It's going to exploit the Purdue rushing defense, which means they're going to tighten that defense up before going to take on a Boston College team that averaged 250 rushing yards per game last year. But they have a brand new head coach in Jeff Hafley. They lose their star running back in A.J. Dillon. They might have to rely on a brand new quarterback. I think Boston College is in for a relatively rough year under Hafley. And I think after 3 very difficult games, Purdue will be more battle-tested and more prepared, and they go on the road and get a huge win over an ACC opponent. They then get their bye week, and they need it. That's a rough 4-game stretch to start the year. They get their bye week, play Rutgers at home. This is a Rutgers team that averaged just 13.3 points per game offensively. Purdue's defense might not be great, but they're going to be able to take care of the Scarlet Knights. I think Rutgers is more competitive this year under Greg Schiano. I think they take a step forward under Greg Schiano. But it's going to be a little while before he can get them to winning multiple conference games and maybe contending for a spot in the postseason. They then go on the road to take on Illinois, a team they lost to 24-6 last year at home. Lovie Smith's squad finally broke through and got to a bowl game, and he returns 9 starters offensively from that squad. That includes their top 4 wide receivers. That includes their quarterback and Brandon Peters. And that includes a defense I think will improve ever so slightly in 2020. With this game being on the road and Illinois needing every win they can to get back to 6-6, I think they have to take care of Purdue, and I think they do just that. Champaign's not necessarily an easy place to play. You know, I'm not saying it's a difficult place to play, but it's not a cakewalk when you walk in there. Just ask Wisconsin. So Purdue drops this game to the Fighting Illini, and then this back half of the schedule here is very difficult. The last 6 games are going to be pretty brutal for them. Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Indiana. The only easy game is Northwestern on Halloween. That's not even easy. We'll start here. I think they do lose to Michigan. I think they do fall to the Wolverines. I think this is a Michigan team that's going to rely heavily on their defense yet again, but by October 24th, you'll really know how they're going to be completely as a team. Last year, for the first half of the season, Michigan struggled offensively. I don't think that will be the case in 2020. I think Josh Gaddis gets the offense rolling, especially with new quarterback Dylan McCaffrey. I think the defense is still a top 15 unit. Being at the big house, I don't think Purdue has enough to go in there and snag a win. They do have enough, though, to snag a win over Northwestern. They do have enough to defeat Pat Fitzgerald and his Wildcats. This is a Northwestern team that Purdue defeated by 2 points on the road last year. It was a terrible game because Northwestern finished 3-9, Purdue finished 4-8. Both of them were beat up with injuries. Both of them didn't have the greatest offenses in the world. It was just terrible. I'm surprised that Purdue was able to score 24 points. I'm surprised Northwestern was able to score 22. But Purdue's lucky they get to host Northwestern this year because the Wildcats will bounce back. They get their quarterback in Peyton Ramsey coming over from Indiana. A lot of their wide receivers return, but more specifically, their defense returns 9 starters, and they are very, very experienced and senior-led. And that will go a very long ways. If Purdue stays healthy, they snag a win over Northwestern. If the offense is not healthy, Bell, Moore, Plummer, then Northwestern comes in and snags a win. It's that simple. But I think the Boilermakers get the dub here on Halloween. They now have 4 wins, which means they have to win 2 of their final 4 in the month of November to get back to the postseason. Unfortunately, one of those wins will not come against Minnesota. This game being on the road already hurts their chances enough, and even though they only lost by a touchdown last year to Minnesota, that was still earlier in the year. And the Golden Gophers under PJ Fleck surprised everybody by going 11-2 last year and were 1 win away from winning the Big Ten West. They now return 8 starters offensively from that team. They return 5 starters from the defense that ranked 10th nationally. It's on the road. Minnesota can't afford to lose to a team like Purdue if they're trying to win the West, and they certainly will not allow that to happen. A loss for Purdue here, and another loss for Purdue against Wisconsin. Last year they fell to the Badgers 45-24, and we mentioned how bad Purdue's rushing defense was. Luckily, Wisconsin no longer has Jonathan Taylor, but you know they're going to have another great running back right behind him, Garrett Groshek or Nakia Watson. But the guy that people continue to sleep on is Jack Cohn. I thought he played great last year as quarterback for the Badgers. And even though he loses Quintez Cephas at wide receiver, they do get Jake Ferguson back at tight end. And even though Purdue hosts this game, I think Wisconsin's offense will improve every single week, and their defense is still going to be a top 10 unit. And that's going to be enough to shut down a Purdue offense that isn't necessarily going to blow you out of the water, even when they're fully healthy. So a loss here, which means they have to win their last 2 games to go bowling. And luckily for them, I do have them upsetting Iowa in the second to last game of the season. I do have them upsetting the Hawkeyes on November 21st. Because last year at Kinnick Stadium, with a beat-up team, Iowa only defeated Purdue 26-20. Purdue was so ravaged by injuries, yet they almost went into Kinnick and pulled off an upset, only losing by 6. So, coming back home, assuming they're fully healthy, I think they can snag a win over the Hawkeyes. I think they pull off an upset. I think Iowa's defense is going to continue to get better every week. I think their offense, led by Spencer Petras and that wide receiver core, is going to be very, very good. But this is one of those trap games that people usually fall into, especially in the final weeks of the year. And I think that's what's going to happen to Iowa here. Which means the season finale against Indiana, the old Oaken bucket will decide whether Purdue goes bowling or not, whether they get that 6th win or not. The last 4 games in this series between Purdue and Indiana has been decided by 1 possession, and that includes last year's 44-41 double overtime thriller, which resulted in an Indiana victory. The Hoosiers returned 17 starters from last year's squad, one that won 8 games for the first time in 26 years. The game is at Indiana, and I think their offense is going to be way too much for this Purdue defense. Michael Penix, Stevie Scott, Watt Fillier, all those guys from a team that averaged over 30 points per game last year, I just don't see a victory in Purdue's future. I do see it being relatively close again. I see it maybe being another 1-possession game, making it 5 straight years it's decided by 1 possession. But I think in the end, the Hoosiers are the one that emerged victorious. At the loss here for Jeff Brohm and his squad, meaning Purdue will finish 2020 at 5-7. 5-7. That's a 1-game improvement from last year, but certainly a disappointment if, in fact, they do stay healthy from week 1 through the end of the year. If you're looking at a chance for them to go bowling, maybe they upset Indiana. Crazy things happen in rivalry games. Maybe they're able to get a win over Air Force. Maybe they're able to get a win over Illinois. They win just one of those games, and Jeff Brohm's back in the postseason. I just don't see it happening this year. The schedule is very tough. The non-conference is very tough. Memphis, Air Force, on the road against Boston College. Not many teams, especially with the talent that Purdue has, would be able to handle that as well as maybe Purdue could, going 2-1 in those games. Jeff Brohm and the Boilermakers had their work cut out for them. We expect a 1-game improvement, but unfortunately falling 1 game short of the ultimate goal. So guys, thank you so much for joining us here at the Gridiron Expert on YouTube. Make sure to continue to like, comment, and subscribe. Check out everything down in the description below for exclusive college football news, content, and offers that you do not want to miss. And once again, as always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on the Gridiron Expert.